Before we dive in, tell me where you're listening from and what pulled you into this story. If it spoke to you, drop a comment. Your words help keep history's forgotten voices alive. History tells you a lie. It whispers that women without husbands were weak, forgotten, powerless, spinsters in dusty corners, widows fading into black veils. But peel back the propaganda and another story emerges. Women who turned singlehood into a weapon. Women who inherited empires, brokered trade deals, commanded armies and terrified kings without a man at their side. And here's the controversial truth. Many of the women in history branded as witches, temptresses or traitors shared one thing in common. They were rich, they were single, and they were dangerous, because single rich women had something society could not control: wealth without a husband. And every time that happened, men rewrote their stories to make sure no one forgot the scandal of their independence. Let's start in Egypt, where the Nile gave birth to queens who ruled as kings. Hatshepsut, for example, refused to fade into the background when her husband died. Instead, she stepped onto the throne herself. She didn't marry again. She didn't share power. She dressed in the false beard of a pharaoh, called herself His Majesty, and filled temples with images of her divine right to rule. For decades, she expanded trade routes, sent ships to the fabled land of Punt, and made Egypt richer than it had been in generations. But when she died, her name was chiseled off monuments, her statues smashed, her memory nearly erased. Why? Because a woman who ruled alone, without a husband, was a scandal too great to leave intact. Move forward 1,000 years to Rome. Here, wealthy widows terrified senators more than invading barbarians. A widow with property could own land, collect rents, even finance political campaigns. Cecilia Metella, for instance, became a symbol of aristocratic wealth. Her tomb still towers outside Rome today. Vestal virgins, unmarried women sworn to chastity, controlled immense religious authority and money. And yet the second Vestal was accused of impropriety. She was buried alive, her wealth stripped, her independence turned into proof of corruption. The message was clear. Independence without a man was tolerated only until it frightened the wrong people. Now cross to medieval Ireland. Alice Keitler married 4 wealthy men and outlived them all. Each time, she grew richer, more independent. By the time her stepchildren looked at their inheritance, they saw almost nothing left. So what did they do? They accused her of witchcraft. They claimed she poisoned her husbands, consorted with demons, and practiced heresy. In 1324, Alice was dragged before Bishop Richard de la Dreda in what became Ireland's first witchcraft trial. Here's the twist. Alice escaped. She fled before they could sentence her, vanishing into history. But her maid, Petronilla de Meath, was burned at the stake in her place. Alice Keitler went down as a scandalous witch, but her real crime was obvious. She was a single, wealthy woman who refused to bow. From Egypt's queens to Rome's widows to Ireland's witch, the pattern repeats. Wealthy, unmarried women became lightning rods for fear, rumor, and suppression. Their stories were twisted into cautionary tales. But look closer and you'll see something else. They were among the only women who ever got to taste true power. Imagine being told day after day that your value depends on who you marry. For most women in Renaissance Europe, that was the script. But Elizabeth Tudor ripped the script in half. Elizabeth I of England inherited a kingdom dripping with debt, divided by religion and circled by enemies. Her advisors begged her to marry. They insisted she needed a husband, a king, a protector. But Elizabeth gave them a line that still crackles with defiance. "I will have one mistress here and no master." She styled herself the Virgin Queen, not because she was celibate, but because she refused to let marriage define her. By staying single, she turned her body into a political weapon. Every royal bachelor in Europe, from Spain, France, even the Holy Roman Empire, hoped to wed her. Elizabeth dangled marriage negotiations like bait, using them to buy time, to extract favors, to keep her rivals fighting each other instead of her. Her singleness was not weakness, it was strategy, and it worked. Under her reign, England defeated the Spanish Armada, expanded trade across oceans, and entered a golden age of theatre, poetry, and empire. The Virgin Queen was an unmarried woman at the center of world power, and it terrified the men who wanted to control her. Not all single rich women wore crowns. Some built them out of stone. Meet Bess of Hardwicke, a 16th-century Englishwoman who married 4 times, but unlike most women, she got richer with each widowhood. By the time she was done, she was one of the wealthiest women in England, second only to Elizabeth I herself. And here's the controversial part. She didn't spend her fortune quietly. She built. Hardwicke Hall, her mansion, still stands, its walls filled with more glass than stone, a bold display of wealth when glass was one of the rarest, most expensive luxuries. Bess knew what she was doing. Every window glittered with the message, "I am rich, I am powerful, and I don't need a husband." Of course, society tried to paint her as ruthless, ambitious, unfeminine. But the truth is that she played the system better than anyone else. Men could gamble away fortunes in duels or politics. Bess accumulated and cemented hers in brick and glass. She left behind not just houses, but a dynasty and a legend. Across Europe, widows in this period discovered a loophole. Marriage took away your freedom, but widowhood gave it back. In France, Italy, and England, wealthy widows managed estates, loaned money, even ran businesses. Some were called merry widows, not because they laughed too much, but because they refused to remarry. Why would they? A widow had legal control over her property, her contracts, and her household. Marrying again would hand all of that back to a man. Controversial? Absolutely. Clergymen thundered that widows who avoided remarriage were unnatural. Pamphlets accused them of lust, greed, witchcraft. But the reality is simpler. These women had figured out that singlehood meant freedom. They could run vineyards, negotiate with merchants, commission paintings, and raise their children without interference. The church wanted them silent, society wanted them compliant, but in their widowhood these women carved out a rare space where wealth and independence met. And then there were the courtesans. In Venice and Florence, high-ranking courtesans were technically single women, unmarried, often educated and wealthy through their patrons. Unlike wives, who were often locked away, courtesans could attend salons, discuss philosophy, and even influence politics. They became tastemakers in art and fashion, their portraits painted by the greatest artists of the age. Of course, moralists branded them sinners. But to many they were role models, women who lived outside marriage, outside obedience, yet inside circles of wealth and power. From Elizabeth I to Bess of Hardwicke, from merry widows to Venetian courtesans, the Renaissance shows us a pattern. When women remained single, they could bend rules that married women couldn't. Their singleness gave them a margin of freedom, and their wealth made it undeniable, but that freedom always came at a cost. They were slandered, feared, painted as unnatural or scandalous, which only proves the point. A single, rich woman didn't just live outside the system, she exposed the system itself. Sail across the oceans with me to the 17th and 18th centuries, and you'll find the same pattern, widows in power holding the reins of trade, land, and empire. In the Caribbean and the American colonies, widowed women inherited plantations, ships, and warehouses. Society told them to remarry for protection, but many didn't. They knew better. A husband could seize their fortune. Widowhood let them run it themselves. Some of these women became shipping magnates, selling sugar, rum, and tobacco across the Atlantic. Others profited from the slave trade, making fortunes from a system as cruel as it was lucrative. And here's the part history books often gloss over. Widows weren't just passive placeholders until another man took over. Some were cutthroat, shrewd, and utterly ruthless. If you picture them as timid caretakers of wealth, you've missed the point. These women survived by mastering the very systems meant to contain them. Of course, that power was precarious. Colonial laws often tried to restrict women's financial autonomy, but loopholes, wills, and clever accounting kept some widows in control for decades. And whenever they were too successful, too visible, you'll notice something. The slanders reappeared, rumors of greed, accusations of immorality, the old suspicion that wealth without a man had to mean corruption. Now leap forward to the 19th century, the age of railroads, steel, and unimaginable wealth. In America's Gilded Age, a new figure appeared, the unmarried heiress. Take the Vanderbilt and Astor families, dynasties dripping with money. Their daughters were expected to marry European aristocrats, trading dollars for titles. Many did, becoming duchesses and countesses abroad. But some didn't. Some stayed single, choosing philanthropy, art, or politics over arranged marriages. Newspapers at the time loved to mock them. Spinster millionairesses, they called them, as if independence were pathetic. Yet these so-called spinsters were building universities, endowing hospitals, funding suffrage campaigns. They turned their fortunes into tools of reform. One New York heiress even remarked, "Why should I marry to give my fortune to one man when I can spend it to benefit thousands?" Controversial, shocking, unladylike, and revolutionary. Europe had its own version. In the salons of Paris and London, wealthy, unmarried women, nicknamed bluestockings, hosted philosophers, scientists, and poets. They funded books that male publishers refused to print. They created spaces where radical ideas about democracy, equality, revolution were debated long into the night. Were they mocked? Absolutely. Caricatures painted them as man-hating crones, dried-up spinsters with too much education. But here's the truth. Without these single, wealthy women, many Enlightenment thinkers would never have had a stage. Their wealth bought freedom, their singleness gave them space, and their salons helped birth revolutions. Even in the age of kings and empires, singlehood could be a crown. Consider Catherine the Great of Russia. Though technically married, her husband Peter III was so incompetent that Catherine staged a coup, deposed him, and ruled as an empress in her own right. Widowed in all but name, she reigned alone for decades, modernizing Russia, expanding its empire, and scandalizing Europe with rumors of her lovers. Or look at Queen Nzinga of Nongo and Matamba in West Africa. She refused to be controlled by marriage. Instead, she led armies, negotiated with the Portuguese, and styled herself as a sovereign unmatched by any man. Her singleness wasn't just personal choice, it was political defiance. By the late 19th and early 20th century, the merry widow had gone international. Wealthy widows and heiresses funded suffrage, ran newspapers, and shaped politics. Some used their fortunes for progressive causes. Others lived flamboyant lives, scandalizing polite society with affairs, salons, or travels. But whether saint or scandal the pattern held, single women with money could act in ways married women never could. They were free agents in a world built to cage them, and that made them powerful and dangerous. From colonial widows to Gilded Age heiresses, the story repeats. Wealth insulated single women from the worst constraints of patriarchy. But it also painted targets on their backs: too much money, too much independence, too much visibility, and suddenly you were a witch, a scandal, or a caricature. But step back and look at the bigger picture. These women didn't just survive. They shaped trade, culture, politics, and revolutions. They were forces of history, and they did it without a husband's shadow at their side. When society couldn't explain the independence of a woman with wealth, it often turned to its favorite weapon: accusation. Think of the witch trials. In Salem, in Bamberg, across Scotland and France, look closely at the women most often accused. Many were widows or unmarried women who owned land, who controlled money, who didn't have a husband to manage them. In the village imagination, their independence became dangerous. A widow with her own farm wasn't just unlucky, she was suspect. How else could she maintain herself without a man unless the devil himself was lending a hand? It wasn't about broomsticks, it was about bank accounts. Witchcraft accusations were often society's way of clawing back wealth from women who had slipped the noose of dependency. Even at court, where power glittered in crowns and jewels, wealthy single women faced suspicion. Take Christina, Queen of Sweden. She inherited her throne as a young woman and refused marriage for her entire reign. She wore men's clothing, studied philosophy, collected art, and ruled with an iron will. Her refusal to wed and her eccentric habits made her the target of endless rumors. Was she immoral, mad, even murderous? To her enemies, her singleness was proof of corruption. To her supporters, it was proof of genius. The same whispers haunted single noblewomen across Europe. A duchess without a husband was never seen as simply independent. She was seen as scheming, corrupt, possibly treasonous. The 18th and 19th centuries added a new stereotype, the merry widow, but not in a flattering way. In newspapers and plays, widows with money were mocked as predatory, hunting for new husbands, seducing younger men, wasting fortunes on lovers. It was satire, yes, but it carried a sting. Society found it easier to laugh at these women than admit they were actually thriving. It's a pattern you'll notice over and over. When women hold wealth without men, culture invents monsters to explain it. Witch, seductress, gold digger, even murderer. But let's not miss the bigger point. This wasn't just name-calling, it was political. Accusations of witchcraft stripped women of property. Gossip about heiresses pressured them back into marriages that kept wealth in male hands. Satirical plays made wealthy widows look ridiculous, undermining their power in society. It was never really about morality. It was about control. A single woman with money was harder to control, and so culture branded her as dangerous. Even into the modern era, the shadow lingers. Successful single women in the 20th century were often described as cold, unfeminine, or man-hating. Businesswomen were ridiculed. Heiresses were painted as tragic figures doomed without husbands. But behind the mockery is a long history of fear. Fear that women with money might not just survive, but might thrive in ways that reshape society. Walk into a boardroom today and you'll see echoes of this history. A single, wealthy man is a bachelor. He's James Bond, Gatsby, Clooney. A single, wealthy woman. Too often she's still framed as an anomaly, a question mark, a warning. What's wrong with her? It's the old ghost of Theodora, of Christina, of the merry widows and the witches, whispering that wealth without a man must mean corruption, scheming, or danger. But here's the twist. Modern women are no longer hiding from those shadows, they're burning them down. Take Oprah Winfrey, unmarried, child-free, a billionaire by her own making. For centuries, a woman in her position would have been accused of sorcery, scandal, or seduction. Instead, she built an empire, her independence not a scandal but a symbol. Or Rihanna, not a duchess, not a queen, yet she built a billion-dollar brand and declared on stage that she doesn't need saving. She is the savior. Today's wealthy single women are reclaiming the archetypes once used to demonize them. Witch? Then let her be a witch, but one who brews empires instead of potions. Widow, let her laugh, but on her way to buying the company, not to the altar. Dangerous? Absolutely, but only to systems built to keep her silent. What's fascinating is that the accusations of the past now read like backhanded compliments. She's too independent to need a husband. She's too wealthy to be controlled. She's too clever to be tricked. These were once meant as condemnations. Today, they're aspirations. Young women on TikTok call themselves Delulu, rich aunties, witchy CEOs, soft-life princesses. They're playing with the same cultural fears that once burned women at the stake, turning them into power memes. History tried to bury these women under scandal and satire, but you can't kill what keeps returning. The witch trials failed to erase women who lived outside male control. The gossips failed to diminish widows who ran estates. The newspapers failed to shame heiresses into hiding. And now, in the 21st century, the witch, the widow, and the heiress are back, not as cautionary tales, but as icons. Here's the truth. Single rich women have always been dangerous. Not because they cursed villages, seduced men, or squandered fortunes, but because they proved, again and again, that women could thrive without male permission. And that, across centuries, was the real monster in the room. So the next time you hear someone joke about the rich widow, or whisper about a difficult woman with money, remember the history behind the punchline. It's not comedy, it's fear. And if you lean in close, past the smoke of bonfires and the ink of scandal sheets, you'll hear the echo of their laughter, sharp, unbent, defiant. Because they weren't just surviving, they were winning. As the shadows lengthen and the stars begin to whisper, we close the pages of this ancient tale. In the hush of night, truth rests where faith once stood strong. Sleep gently now, wrapped in the echoes of empires long gone. Until next time, when darkness falls and another lullaby of a fallen world begins.